Good afternoon. I would like to greet the steering committee in the person of Mark Spolman. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Elisangela Vallarini, who came to my chambers and invited me personally. And I really appreciate that time together. Thank you very much. So when we are going to talk about Brazil, about corruption, we get embarrassed now. My country, historically, is well known by courtesy. But in some way, courtesy became a synonym of corruption. We Brazilians feel that our moral self-esteem is in the bottom of the well. You can say in Portuguese, I don't know in English, is on the limit. On the other hand, when you talk to Brazilian laymen, you can feel that they are aware about the meaning of money laundering. They know the names of the justices of Brazilian Supreme Court justices, the way they decide, because on TV it's possible to watch judicial live sessions. Also on TV, in the 70s, an advertisement with a famous Brazilian football or soccer player, Gerson, stated in this advertisement a sentence that became the symbol of our culture in that time. We must take advantages in all situations. What was taken as a good orientation, but today it has been taken as a symbol of corruption. Corruption is a co-production work. It's part of human rights issues. We have to deal with all of them: education, food, environmental, healthcare. For many people, especially part of politicians, it doesn't matter if there is no clean water or sewer system or good education, etc. People in Brazil went to the streets tiring of so much corruption, taxes, and too bad public services. They started a cognitive liberation. Public collectively realized that they have power and they have a voice. In Brazil, we could see an informal democracy. Human beings are more vigilant, denunciatory, and qualifying or disqualifying against the rulers, being protected, self-protection, and the common people are not protected by them. Internet has helped a lot. You are talking about internet in the previous speech. It was good because although it's uncontrolled voice source, it was good to combat corruption in Brazil. Brazilians are looking forward for the jail of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, our former president. The current one, Michel Temer, like said Mark Spolman, professor, he is indicted twice. And one of his ministers was caught with 51 million reais, or $17 million. What Brazilians expect today? To apply equally the rule of law. We don't have an effective judicial system, and what we see is impunity. On the other hand, the interpretation of law is being done in an absolute way. But absolutism goes against the idea of democracy. Democracy is a form of government in which one establishes who has the power of decision, in what form, and on behalf of the people, the majority and the minority. The defenders of democracy in quotes, usually attack some judicial positions in Brazil because they represent their potential actions on internal detention or sources of getting easy money. We developed in Brazil what I called Brazilian criminal doctrine, designed and applied mainly to wealth people or political related people. Impunity is the rule. In Brazil, there is the devaluation of law, of the importance of respecting the law. It happens due to a long period of dictatorship, which usually misrepresented the purpose of the law. That's why the fundamental principles, given the abuses committed at that time of the dictatorship, have gained enormous strength, and the Constitution has been praised as a diploma that should have as many principles as rules as possible. Our Constitution has 114 articles, 250 articles, not counting 114 articles of the acts and transitory provisions. So, this Brazilian criminal doctrine contaminated the whole system. Judiciary is meager to combat corruption in Brazil. If it happens, it discourages all the enforcement bodies to tackle accurately corruption. Majority of politicians, governmental staff, including the president, are involved in corruption scandals. And I'd like to give you some examples of the misrepresenting of the criminal law. For instance, pre-trial detention after being convicted. Only in case of final decision, it's possible to put someone in jail in Brazil. However, the Brazilian Supreme Court decided last year that people can be arrested if the decision is upheld by the Court of Appeals. But you know, the defendants changed, and now the Brazilian Supreme Court is trying to review this legal position. We have several examples, and I will give some for you. Abuse of power crime bill. There is a bill in the Congress now that says if an appeals court reverses the decision of a judge, it can be considered a crime, humanistic crime, you say. That's a real threat of independence of judges and prosecutors. Also, soft penalties. For instance, when you see the penalties of corruption, it starts from 2 years imprisonment and fine. It's too low for us, regardless the amount of corruption crime committed. We have also the right, as usual, for pardon. But you know, in Brazil, it's possible to pardon by the president in penalties up to 12 years to get the benefit to go to their homes for defendants, unless there is threat or violence. If there is threat or violence, up to 4 years imprisonment, the defendant can be benefit from pardon also. But you know, corruption starts from 2 years imprisonment. Exit permits from prison. According to our law, there is a right to defendants to be out of prison in some cases, in some hypotheses. During the Father's Day, last August 5, just one day, Sunday of Father's Day. In São Paulo State, because of the Father's Day, 18,000 defendants convicted had the right to go out of prison. Not for a single day, for 7 days. And what I think is most relevant to mention here is that there are in Brazil special courts for authorities. While we see from the news, from many cases, from doctrine, that car wash investigation in Brazil is very successful, but you see only conviction of businessmen. What is good when you consider the past. But for politicians, we don't see any single decision about conviction so far. We have just indictments and just indictment accepted by the Brazilian Supreme Court. There is no term to see the end of the case inside the Brazilian Supreme Court. Why I'm telling you Brazilian Supreme Court? Because high authorities, like politicians, governors, even judges, have the right to be judged by special courts. That means that there is no end for this kind of cases. What I consider is not fair for the population. This is the bad side of the history, but when you consider the efforts we have made in Brazil, it's important to mention the National Anti-Corruption Money Laundering Strategy, what we call ANCLA. It is a good and important initiative to combat the organized crime because for the first time there was a concentration of knowledge in combating corruption, for instance. Several annual strategy meetings with more than 60 enforcement bodies since 2003, date of the creation, what was very, very good. The specialized courts in financial crimes and money laundering, based on the capitals of the states, represented the beginning of tax forces in Brazil. And what I think was very important with ANCLA, the national strategy, anti-corruption strategy, is that before the creation of ANCLA, all the bodies were disconnected and were trying to do their best by themselves. ANCLA broke the prejudice among bodies and the vanity of their members. Before, it was very common, the idea like, what I don't do is wrong, illegal, and it has to be annulled. I'm honest, but I don't know if you are honest too. So ANCLA broke this idea. It was very important. And resulted in, for example, Criminal Clean Record Act. That's a law that was issued in 2010 that says that a politician cannot be elected if he or she has been convicted by a final decision or by any appellate court. What was very good, it was an initiative of ANCLA. Anti-Corruption Act in Brazil, it was also an outcome of ANCLA. Money Laundering Act, the review of the Money Laundering Act was possible because of ANCLA, because of this group of bodies, and we could finish with the list of precedent crimes in Brazil. And also, we started to deal with plea bargaining, what was very good, and what was seen as not an act of vigilance, but important tool to tackle corruption. there was an important decision from our Brazilian superior courts. I need to tell you, in Brazil, you have 4 instances. You have the trial courts, the Court of Appeals, Superior Court, and the Brazilian Supreme Court. So, in a soft case, we say soft case because when you deal with drug traffickers, you have a kind of jurisprudence decisions differently when we see and observe the decisions in case of economic crimes like corruption. So there was an act of a precedent crime about drug trafficking in the West, but the defendant was being charged for money laundering in Brazil, and he was convicted by money laundering, although the previous crime was, the defendant was acquitted because there was no relevant evidence to convict that defendant. I don't know if you understand, I'm trying to tell you. So the previous crime was finished because there was no enough evidence, but money laundering was possible to recognize, although the previous crime we didn't have enough evidence in the West. What happened in that case? There were hearings with some testimonies who were brave enough to say, yes, drug trafficking was committed outside Brazil. That was enough. It was convicted by it was recognized in money laundering by the Superior Court in Brazil. Important outcome of ENCLA, also Organized Crime Act. This law regulated the plea bargaining in 2013, although plea bargaining was being done in some special courts, trial courts in money laundering in Brazil. But with this law, was possible to see frequently more cases due to several plea bargaining. What was astonished for judges in Brazil is not only judges, but prosecutors, even for the people. We see on TV pleaders saying, I committed a crime, but they say in a way that there is no regret, there is no shame. They confess crimes like they sit on a chair. There is no single feeling of regret, what is very weird. We had some emblematic cases in Brazil. First, I will mention you, it's one case that I was the judge. I just mentioned that the case was dismissed because there was a participation of the intelligence unit in transcription of the wiretapping records. So, in that time, there was not the support of the people like you have today. In that time, in 2008, there was not a developed internet movement like you have today. I guess that's why this case, I guess, was dismissed by Superior Courts. A second case in 2009 called Castelo de Areia. It's a kind of a car wash case, but previous. It was also dismissed by the Superior Courts in Brasilia, saying that because of an anonymous report, it was not possible to start the investigation of the case. But, courts didn't consider that. In fact, there was an anonymous report, but besides it, there were plea bargaining and another investigation supporting the case. But this case, in that time, was dismissed, and also there was no public support to combat corruption that time. After that, we had Mensalon case. It's an important case ruled for the first time in the Brazilian Supreme Court against politicians. And we had some convictions, but all the defendants are in their homes because the amount of penalties were not enough to put them in prison for a long time. And now, recently, we have the car wash, very famous and very high-profile case. And what is important to mention here, for the first time, it was delivered a search warrant in 2014 of the headquarters of Mossack Fonseca firm in Panama, related to Panama Papers. And it was the first judicial order against the Mossack Fonseca office outside Panama, of course, in São Paulo. It was emblematic, important thing to mention. Challenges, I think, decrease of the public perception index that makes the country, Brazil, occupy the 79th position in 2016, according to International Transparency. Freedom of press and support of civil society, especially with internet and going on the streets, must be protected from any attempt of change. We don't have it, but you should have a government transformation program. The government, most of the staff of the government is involved in corruption in Brazil now. That's why you don't have a program, a government program against corruption. Corruption court system. I said corruption court system, but the judicial court system, it's better to mention. We needed to change because you have different courts. You have these special courts, the Brazilian Supreme Court for politicians, and you have different results of the same cases involving the same facts. We don't have a lobbying law, but it's important to mention that lobbying, it's considered in most countries a legal function, legal profession, but it's a kind of legal corruption too. And in Brazil, it's prohibited now, it's prohibited the political financing, financing from corporations for political campaigns, what is very good, at least the beginning. International cooperation movement, improvement, it's very important. Once I tried the extradition of a defendant from the UK, United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom rejected it, saying that in Brazil, the situation of prisons are not good. But it's not true at all. When you consider the federal prisons, they are very good. When you consider a prison, a state prison, only for foreign people, it's very good, a prison. So anyway, United Kingdom rejected to extradite an important businessman, a national. He came from Russia to England, and then he got his nationality there, citizenship. Also, Switzerland. Switzerland refused to summon a defendant who was charged with corruption, tax evasion, capital flight, but Switzerland justified its position saying, this case involves tax fraud. Tax is not illegal in Switzerland. So Switzerland denied it to extradite the defendant, and I was forced to denounce in Switzerland to UN, say that they are not applying the Palermo Convention, and also the OECD in Paris say that they are not applying the FATF recommendations. And I'm finishing now. The current situation is like this, to conclude my speech. On the politician side, they are trying to change our laws. These laws that were able to put them in a bad condition now. But they failed because there was a big movement, public movement against this change of law, what was very important. On the people's side, what is the current situation? It's very difficult now for the people to select one person for the next election, general elections next year in 2018. There is no a single, or there is just few names out of corruption scandals. That's what is very difficult for the people, for us to find a good name for the next elections. So, corruption is like a bus. You can be inside the bus, you can get inside the bus and say, oh, it's great. You can be aside of the bus and say, okay, corruption is there, I'm here, but I blind my eyes. Or you can be in front of the bus. You can be, in fact, in front of the bus. Yes, and it's not easy. The bus will reduce at least the speed. Thank you very much. Oh. Sorry. It's just because I don't like this kind. Oh,
Thank you very much.
My gosh. It was thank you.